I was reading a report from the Federal Reserve Board's Survey on Consumer Finances, and I discovered something really interesting hiding right there in plain sight. And that is that the average retiree's net worth goes up after they retire, and it goes up pretty dramatically and stays there for at least 10 years, maybe even 20, depending on which statistic you use. The data was presented in today's dollars, which means it's a true comparison. Many people believe that the Federal Reserve Board's Survey of Consumer Finances report is about the best that there is out there on personal financial data. It's well researched, and it's been around since 1946, which means different political parties, different economic times, different points in the world, frankly, from 1946 until now. But most importantly, there isn't a profit motive. Some of these reports that come from these investment firms do have a profit motive because, frankly, they have a vested interest in you feeling like you don't have enough money. You could have $10 million, and there would be a report out there that says that's not enough for you to retire on. You get the point. The report comes out every 3 years. The most recent one was released late 2023 for the period ended 2022. The previous one was for the period ended 2019. And just to get the technical stuff out of the way, there are 36 financial categories like net worth, debt, etc., and 9 individual categories. And of course, I went straight to the age of the family household that is being surveyed in the survey. And because someone will ask the question, with the information we're going to talk about next, the data is by household, not by individual. The only problem I have with the Survey of Consumer Finances, the way that it's presented, at least initially, I'll tell you how to get around this in a moment, is that the homepage basically has 2 drop-down boxes. The box on the left is the economic or the financial drop-down box. Here you pick the category, whether the category is net worth, income, debt, whatever the category you're looking for is. There are 36 of them, and you pick the one that you are trying to match up against the other category. And in the other category, the criteria are people related: age, ethnicity, education, etc. This is fine if you're looking for a soundbite or a quotable for something, but you don't really get the full sense of the information. It's a bit like reading a one-page summary of the book War and Peace, which I happen to have right here. And for those of you who haven't read the book War and Peace, it's about a group of wealthy Russian families who are having a hard time with the Napoleonic Wars in Europe and with their own issues at home. There, I just saved you 1,035 pages of reading. Aren't you happy? Well, the book is a lot more than a one-paragraph summary, and the Survey of Consumer Finances is more than just the home page. I did find a downloadable copy of the entire 58-page survey results, including the narrative. I'll put a link in the description below, and as always, I'll remind you at the end so you don't need to stop the video. In the survey, there are 3 categories that are important to people who are watching this video: age 55 to 64, age 65 to 74, and age 75 plus. Income went up between the first group, age 55 to 64, and the second group, age 65 to 74, by 15% in the survey. Now you're saying, Jeff, wait a minute, 55 to 64, that's an average of age 60. Aren't people still working at age 60? Sort of. The average retirement age in this country is age 62, and that's tied entirely or almost entirely to the minimum age you need to be to take Social Security. However, people who watch this channel tend to be between 59 and 60, but regardless, in either case, it's close enough so that the data still works. But I digress. What's really interesting here with this data is that the average net worth of the 75 plus category is 4% higher than the 55 to 64 category, even though they've been in retirement for a full 20 years. So how can a group with an average age of 70 be 15% higher than a group with an average age of 60? Well, here's why. What happens when someone retires? Almost always they spend less. It's not universal, but no one needs to really tell them to do it. They just slow down because they're concerned that they will blow through their retirement capital. Most of them have actually done the math, and they know that they have 30 years of retirement or more ahead of them, and they know that they can cover that 30 years, but now it's real. So what do? They pull back, maybe even too far back, until they can get comfortable with their new way of life. And this might take several years for many of them. For others, it may be permanent, which brings me to my next point. They have time for their investments to continue to grow. In my last video, I cited the fact that 80% of retirees don't touch their 401k or their IRA if they transfer it into a IRA until they are required to do so. 80%. And 84% only take the required minimum distribution. This means that if they get the same return as a 30-year government bond, which is 4.6%, they'll run out of money at age 120. So instead, what they're doing is living a far more Spartan lifestyle than they really need to live. The next point is that they now receive Social Security, and for the lucky few, they have a pension. This means that they again don't need to touch their retirement accounts or any of their other assets and can live off of the cash flow from those two streams. Social Security, and if you're lucky enough to have a pension, aren't used in the traditional calculation of net worth in most cases. The next point is home appreciation. So even if they're not in that 80% or the 84% that's not touching their IRA, their home is still appreciating, and oftentimes it's appreciating faster than they're taking funds out of their retirement accounts. The average home appreciated 4.4% per year from 1991 until today, as an aside. Next, if they were paying a large amount of money for health care, when they turn 65, they go on Medicare, and of course a Medicare supplement, which means that the cost goes way down. It's also important to note that the period between age 65 and 75 is a relatively healthy period for most people, so it's less likely that they'll need long-term care during this point in their lives. However, long-term care can be a big cost later on in life. The next point is that the generation above them is starting to pass. And if that generation looks anything like this generation, their net worth has a lot of value that they're leaving behind, and this group is receiving a reasonably large inheritance, many times anyway. Think about the age 75 plus category that I mentioned earlier, still 4% higher than the age 55 to 65 category, despite the fact that they've been retired for over 20 years. What's more interesting, though, is a point that I made in my last video, and that is people tend to spend about 10% less per decade, starting in their 70s, and then in their 80s, and in their 90s. So if you're 70, you spend 10% less than in your 60s. If you're 80, you spend 10% less than in your 70s. And if you're 90, well, probably not spending much at all in terms of discretionary spending anyway. If you like this video, please make sure you click subscribe to support the channel. There are a number of people who work on these videos to get them to you, and they look at the number of subscribers as a scoreboard on how well they've done. Also, if you like this video, check out that video, the previous video that I mentioned, why 84% of retirees are making a big RMD mistake. This is Jeff Schmidt, and I'll see you on that video.